Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to dive into a pretty wild idea today, one from a psychiatrist named Dr. Lambert Lowe. And it's this: what if you could understand addiction with a math formula? So let's just start with that really provocative question, right? Can a math problem, a simple equation, really explain something as messy and, as deeply human as addiction? Well, one psychiatrist is basically saying, yeah, it can. After working with patients for more than 10 years, Dr. Lamberlow thinks he's come up with a totally new tool to help us get a handle on it. So his whole idea is that you can take all the messy, complicated stuff that comes with addiction, whether it's a substance or a behavior, and you can actually break it down. You can distill it into a surprisingly simple, structured formula that uses just a handful of key variables. All right, so let's unlock this thing. Let's dive in and see the core of his idea. What exactly is this equation? He calls it, simply enough, the addiction equation. And here's a really important thing to get right away. This isn't about diagnosing whether someone has an addiction or not. It's about measuring its intensity, its severity. And here it is, the whole shebang. So, the severity of an addiction is you take the pleasure plus the urge, you multiply that by the speed squared, and then you divide the whole thing by control. I know, it looks pretty simple, right? But trust me, as we're about to see, each one of these variables, it's got a really powerful story behind it. So what do these things, pleasure, urge, speed, control, what do they actually mean in the real world? Let's break down the math. Okay, so first up, you've got pleasure and urge, and you can almost think of them as these two opposing forces. See, in the beginning, when a dependency first starts, it's usually all about seeking pleasure. It's about that good feeling, what the author calls liking. Now, check out this graph because this is where things get really fascinating. Look at what happens over time. That blue line, the liking or the pleasure, it just nosedives. But at the exact same time, look at that orange line, the craving. It absolutely skyrockets. And this is the whole game right here. This is that crucial shift from someone being impulsive, chasing a good feeling, to being compulsive, just trying to avoid feeling bad. So to make the math work, each of these four factors gets rated on a really simple scale from 1 to 5. So you've got pleasure, which is, that positive feeling you get. Then there's urge, that's the craving. Speed is all about how fast or how often the behavior happens. And finally, you have control, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's your ability to just stop. All right, theory is great. But let's put this equation to the test, right? We're going to see how it holds up by applying it to two totally different examples, from heroin to TikTok. Okay, so for our first case, let's look at something really serious, a person with a severe, long-term heroin dependency. And it's important to understand that at this stage, they're not really getting pleasure from it anymore. The intense urges they feel are almost entirely about avoiding the absolute agony of withdrawal. So let's plug some numbers into the formula. The pleasure, it's really low, so we'll call it a 2. The urge, it's all-consuming, an absolute 5. The speed or frequency of use is high, a 4. And here's the kicker. Their control is practically gone. It's a 1. So you run all that through the equation, and you get a severity score of 112. Now, according to Dr. Lowe's scale, that puts it firmly in the high severity category. No surprise there. Okay, now let's pivot to something that might feel a little more familiar to a lot of us. Case number 2, someone who's stuck in that cycle of compulsive doom scrolling on an app like TikTok, for hours and hours on end. Now, the numbers here are going to tell a very different story. The actual pleasure they're getting from this, pretty low. Let's say a 2. The urge to do it, also pretty low, maybe a 1. But look at the speed. The sheer velocity of swiping through new content is off the charts, a 5. And their control is kind of so-so. We'll call it a 3. You plug those numbers in, and what do you get? A total score of 25. Now, that's still something to pay attention to, for sure, but it falls squarely in the low severity range. And that just highlights the huge difference in intensity, doesn't it? And when you see them side by side like this, it just clicks. This is the whole point. The equation gives us a way, a language, to talk about the vastly different intensity between these two behaviors. Yeah, both can be problematic, but the numbers show you that what's driving them, the underlying dynamics, they are just worlds apart. Okay, so this is all interesting, but why does a formula like this actually matter? What's the point? What's the real-world use for it? Well, the real power here isn't about slapping a label on someone. Again, it's not a diagnostic tool. Instead, it's a way to track the severity of an issue over time. It lets a therapist or a clinician actually measure progress or even setbacks. And this is huge. It helps them pinpoint exactly where to focus their efforts. Do we need to work on building up that person's control? Or is the real battle in reducing the urge? The equation gives you a roadmap. And in the end, Dr. Lowe says his real hope is that this whole framework gives us more than just a number. He wants it to be a new lens for looking at an age-old problem, one that helps build not just understanding, but real compassion. It kind of challenges all of us to stop just looking at the behavior on the surface and instead to try and understand the hidden equation that's driving it all. So, I'll leave you with this. What do you think? Can a formula, a simple piece of math, really help us understand the complexities of the human heart?